Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, and you're listening to Incredible Life Creator Podcast. My guest today is Debbie Elder. Debbie Elder is the nation's leader in motivating students to be peak performers. In September 2013, Debbie became a best-selling author. She co-authored a book with Brian Tracy titled Against the Grain. In June of 2014, Debbie's second book, Share Your Message with the World, achieved international bestseller status. Under her direction and guidance, her Summer Success Summit students ages 7 to 14 have published 4 books in their series, What Every Cool Kid Deserves to Know. Debbie became the owner and head of school of Shady Oak Primary School in August 2014. The school serves grades 1 through 5 in Fort Bend County, Texas. Welcome to the podcast, Debbie.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, so I know you've had a long journey. You didn't start out in education, you started somewhere else. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you, where you grew up, and how you started out?
I would love to. Thank you. So I'm Canadian. I grew up in Ottawa, which is Canada's capital, and I was educated there. I have a degree in criminology, and I served as a police officer in Ottawa. Before I moved to Calgary, when I got to Calgary, I worked at a young offender center, which is like a juvenile delinquent home in the States. And I had the opportunity to run the disciplinary unit. So if you had either committed a pretty serious crime out in the community or broke rules within the institution, you came to me. So I learned a whole lot about motivating others and getting my point across in a way that allowed them to be still respectful of me and I respected them, but to be very fair. And it was really great pre-parental training, that's for sure. So when I left, it was because I was giving birth to my first daughter. I did that at home with her for a little while and quite frankly needed something else. So I was involved in probationary work for a little while. And then I decided that I would go back and I did some part-time work. I worked for the John Howard Society, which is very popular up in Canada and in the northeast part of the States. And it's an organization that helps criminals sort of re-enter into society and be successful and effective. And so my job was to go into the schools and teach about alternatives to incarceration. When I gave birth to my second daughter, I decided, well, my husband and I decided it was probably time to stay in the house. So I did that. And that lasted for a very short period of time before I said, I still need something else. So I looked into therapeutic foster work. And what makes it different from regular foster work is that the students and the children that we took in had severe behavior issues. So we took in teenage girls because we had young girls ourselves. And we did that for about 7 years. We had 38 different girls. We were an assessment home. So they came in, we assessed them, determined where they needed to be, and then they left. So they stayed with us typically for about 4 months. What I learned doing that is some of the girls would have been much more successful if they just stayed. So I lobbied the legislature, had it changed, so we were able to keep them longer. And we did that before we were transferred to Ireland. So I lived in Ireland for a little while, which was awesome. Mm-hmm. And then we moved to Houston, where I now reside. At that time, my daughters were young and they were in school. One of my daughters was in second grade and my other daughter was in preschool. And the preschool hired me as a teacher. And I was like, all right. So I went through the training. I learned how to do that. Did that for a couple of years and then was hired by a company to be a teacher trainer. After 2 years of part-time, apparently I was well qualified. So I did that for 4 years around the country. Every weekend I traveled to a different city and trained teachers from a stage, anywhere between 800 and 1,200 teachers. So it was very exciting. I was also homeschooling my daughters at that time. What had happened for us is my youngest is hearing impaired, and it just wasn't working out within the school setting for her. And I was also substitute teaching at the school. And I would come home and say to my husband, it feels like there's not enough curriculum. Like I'm done by noon. And we talked about it and he's like, well, maybe it's because they know that a substitute is coming and they don't want to overwhelm you. And I'm like, all right. Then I got a long-term subbing contract. No, that was all they were teaching. So with my behavior management background and working with, as a cop and in a young offender center, little first and second graders, that was pretty easy. So I was able to manage behavior. So we got through our stuff really fast. So that kind of drove my decision to pull my daughters and homeschool them because I thought we can get through a lot more work. And so I did that. And after a couple of years, people noticed what we were doing and were like, hey, maybe you should homeschool my kid. I'm like, I don't even know if that's legal in Texas. Yeah, well, it is. So I opened my home and had 12 children come in addition to my two. For we did that for 5 years. I started 14 other middle and high schools around the country, and we serviced about 1,500 homeschooled families a year with this learning sort of system and curriculum. And that was amazing. My daughters then went off to college. My youngest graduated as valedictorian. And so I was like, okay, so it worked. We got validation here. And I did some college planning for about 3 years, which enabled me to meet with a family, help them with finances, and also help their students be prepared to enter college. We don't do a very good job in this country of preparing our high school students to be successful in college. The transition is very different, and they need to be self-taught, self-motivated, have a lot of self-awareness, and they typically don't. So that was my role that I filled. And then in 2012, my financial advisor came to me and said, I think you should buy this school. And I said, I think you're crazy. They're just little kids. That's not who I deal with. But after I thought about it, I was like, you know what? What if you could intercept a little earlier in the process so there wouldn't be the troubled teens that you dealt with at the jail? So 2014, as you mentioned, I opened the school, and that's what I'm doing now. And I also sit on a team of advisors for RCI Prep Academy, which is a whole new way of learning and instructing that we're getting ready to, we're taking enrollments now, and we will officially launch in January. And so lots of stuff going on, keeping busy. I am a professional speaker, so I do a lot of speaker trainings. A lot of them have been like this or over Zoom since the pandemic, but yeah, life is good. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for allowing me to introduce myself.
Yeah, so some questions about things in your past. So you had two young children and you brought into your home troubled teenage girls.
I did.
I would be so worried about my two bringing in troubled teens into the home, thinking, well, what if they do something mean or whatever to my kids? What were your thoughts as you were doing that and bringing these girls into your home?
Well, that was probably my husband's thoughts. He's an engineer, and that was a very hard emotional journey for him. But I had worked with these kids. Some of them I picked up at the jail I used to work at and brought them into my home. And this was the crazy thing. When you treat them with respect and when you honor who they were delightful. And what I learned, so imagine, Kimberly, if you came to my house and I would say, Kimberly, you know, you've been working so hard, and I just want to honor you. So tonight I'm going to prepare dinner, and I serve you this beautiful dinner, and we have a glass of wine, and the next morning you get up and right next to you is breakfast in bed. You're like, wow, I'm not ever going to leave this woman's house. But if you're like most of us, by lunchtime, you're like, you know, I should probably set the table or make the salad, right? There's a need to want to contribute. And so one of the things that I did with my foster daughters is allowed them to contribute and be a part of my family. Other people call those chores. We call them contributions, because when you contribute, you feel part of the group. And I also decided that I wasn't going to tell them no. I had a non-negotiable no. We play a lot of cards in Canada, and we had like a trump card, that's your boss card. And I told my foster daughters, you know, if you call me at midnight and you want to extend your time at the party and I tell you no, don't go all it's because I don't trust you stuff. I'm probably exhausted and I want to go to bed. I said, but for the most part, I'm going to allow you to have some dialogue with me and defend your position and back up why you want what you want. So one of my foster daughters wanted to pierce her nose. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. I said, well, do some research. Yeah, for sure, I'll take you. I said, but I don't understand what happens. So if you get a cold and you have to blow your nose, does it know? Like she did her research and decided, yeah, maybe not. Maybe I won't, pierce my nose. So I had 3 rules because we had to. The agency I worked for, I'm not a big rule person. So my first rule was, if you're going to smoke, you need to smoke in the kitchen. We lived in Calgary. The winters were cold and they all smoked. It was the 80s. The second rule was if you're going to make a long distance phone call, you need to let me know first. Well, these were street kids. They're not calling anybody, especially not long distance. And the third rule was the way our house was set up, the only rooms upstairs were mine and my husband's, and then my daughter's rooms. So there was nothing up there for them to see. I walked them up the very first day they arrived. I showed them around. And then we had basically an apartment for them in the basement. They had a workout area, they had a TV lounge area, they had their bedroom. They never spent any time down there. They were always up with us, hanging out. So I'm probably overly optimistic about people, but none of these girls let me down. Not one. They were so incredibly impressive in my home. They were awesome.
Wow.
So I think when you set a bar for people, they will go for the bar. So
yeah,
I had no fear.
hopeful because you think of people who get into trouble, whether they be teenagers or full-grown adults, and sometimes you think, well, will they ever change? But you're just proof that with the right environment, people can really do well.
Well, and I had noticed too at the jail when I worked there that a lot of the kids I had experience of interacting with had been much more victimized than they ever victimized. In other words, they were so badly treated. When you're in Calgary and it's wintertime, our numbers went way up. And these kids would come in and they would hug me. They were home. They used to break my heart, right? That this being in a jail, but we fed them, we ensured their safety, we clothed them, we took care of their medical needs. We were better than a cold Calgary street with a bunch of snow and parents who were abusive or neglectful. So yeah, kids are awesome. They just are.
Yeah, that is so amazing. And now I'm sure everybody else is thinking about this, other people who are listening. What is this teaching system that allowed you to be very productive and get a lot done all at once and keep people motivated?
Yeah, so it's really honoring the child and giving them voice and choice. So when I brought my daughters home when we homeschooled, as I mentioned, I'm Canadian. Well, in Texas, the third, fourth, and fifth grade social studies curriculum is Texas history. So I said to my daughters, I think we know enough Texas history. What do you want to learn? And they're like, Mom, we want to learn about the Middle Ages. We think that's a really interesting timeline. I'm like, all right. So we did what back then was called a unit study and now is called a project-based learning, where you dig deep into a subject and you cover all of your subjects with that. So what that means is we studied the Middle Ages. So science was about scientific discoveries during that time. English was reading novels set in that time. Social studies was learning about what was going on. So we kind of dove deep into it. So when you go really deep into a subject, you're going to find something that you're interested in, even if you didn't pick it. What's happening in public schools across the nation is they're getting ready for the next standardized test. So they go this deep. And it's really difficult to get engaged because it's all fluff and stuff. Even children know that there's no meaning here. There's no purpose. And so my daughters loved it. And we also did a lot of hands-on learning. So one of the things we studied was, what does a knight in shining armor wear? And what are the proper names for those pieces of the armor? So I had my daughters run around the house and get like their soccer shin pads on and their elbow pads and a helmet and come back and take everything off and call it by the right name. And that was like really fun. So several years later, when I was showing my home as an example to how to set up your home if you wanted to have a homeschooled area for either your own child or other children, Melissa was walking by and I said, hey, Melissa, do you remember when we studied the Middle Ages and we did the knight in shining armor and what they wore? She said, oh, yeah. I said, do you remember any of it? She went from head to toe and named every piece in order. And I went, okay, that worked. So allowing the opportunity to take those approaches into the classroom. And the other thing that we do a little differently is we really honor social and emotional learning. You know, if you look at the entire pie of a human being, only this much really is academics, right? There's a whole other, percentage of it that needs to be addressed, but nobody addresses it. It's like it's going to happen through osmosis. So we've decided to weigh academics and social emotional development equally, and we do. And so we put a lot of time into teaching how to read body language and how to really listen when somebody's talking actively, and how to resolve conflict and how to be kind. So one of the things that your listeners might understand, especially if they work for a large corporation, we have a mission statement, we have a vision, and I do a lot of corporate training and have in the past. And you walk into any corporation in a nation and you ask anyone walking the halls, what is the mission? And they're like, they can't recite it. So I took our mission at the school, I handed it to the current fifth graders that year, which was a couple of years ago, and I said, I want you to turn this into a creed. I want you to put it into action words. If you were truly going to live this mission statement, what would you do each day? And so it's all I am statements, I do. And they recite that every morning, and they've memorized it now. And it's a reminder of how to focus and target their day. And it makes a huge difference. One other thing we do is we end each day with a compliment circle. I'm big on building strong culture. So imagine you're in a classroom with a bunch of other children, and you now know at the end of the day, you have to come up with a compliment, really like a recognition, not just like you have beautiful hair, but more sort of like, thank you so much, Kimberly, for helping me on the playground when I fell. I really like that you went in and got me ice for my knee. And what that tells me about you is that you're very caring and very observant. That lands, right? That
Yes,
really
it
lands.
really
So
does.
if you know you have to find that about everybody in your class, it's that whole, is the glass half empty or half full? You're looking for good in others, that's what you find. And so that is really one of our signature things that we do at the school that really changes how children learn. When you feel connected, there's a real sense of learning. If you don't feel connected, if you think that those girls over there are talking about you, it's really hard to focus on your learning. So I've developed, and I talked about it in my TED Talk, the 6 pillars that I have that we kind of base all of our curriculum ideas and everything we do at the school on. I think we all need to have a basis on sort of our fundamental beliefs. And so our 6 are connection, communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving. And that's what we do. And then we also integrate into our day a lot of reflection time. So I want the students to stop at the end of art and go, wow, so when I used Elmer's glue, it didn't stick. But when I got the other glue that has this, I can't remember, the rubber cement, it worked. And so make a note of that. That's a win, right? Or something that maybe didn't work at all and you're going to have to look into. So at the end of ELA, what did you learn today? What was fun about this? What do you know about yourself? In our math class, if you get below a 90, you have to do critiques. And what that looks like is just 3 questions, but you have to write them in nice handwriting. You have to correctly capitalize and punctuate your sentences. So it looks something like this. Number 2 is wrong. I should have checked my order of operation. This is the correct answer and show your work. Well, they hate them. Oh my gosh, they hate doing critiques. And so what happens is they slow down and all of a sudden they read all of the directions. They don't make their 2s that look like a 5. They check their work before they hand it in. So it kind of ups their mastery level, which is important to me. So we really work on building success habits that will take them into their adulthood. What I've learned is if you give it to them when they're young, it builds their character and that's who they are. I was taking my daughters to the doctor for a checkup when we lived in Calgary, so they were super young. And I was reading a Reader's Digest in the doctor's office. And it was a story about this gentleman who was so excited when he got home to tell his wife that he had been the one who was chosen as the salesperson to go on this Alaska fishing trip with their brand new client. And she's mortified. He's like, what is wrong? This is like such an exciting opportunity for our family. I mean, this could, if I land this deal, oh my gosh, like we're going to be so happy with the money that's going to be coming in. And she's like, honey, we've been together for 16 years. You don't even own a fishing rod. Like, I'm afraid you're going to make a fool of yourself. He's like, oh, no. When I was 9, Uncle Joe taught me how to fish. If I can do it at 9, I can do it now. And I was like, oh, this is so good. So that's kind of been my philosophy. So right now I'm working on a course for my students that cover the principles of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And I'm a big believer in taking what adults think is just for adults and bringing it down to students. And they are so capable, they so get it, they eat it up, and they don't even question it, they just go do it. I used to be involved with Howard Berg, and we used to sell his speed reading course, which is the best out there if you're looking for a speed reading course. And I would go and speak at these big events, and people would come and they'd purchase a course from us. And then they'd come back the next year and they'd purchase it again. And I would remember them. And I'm thinking, they didn't even take the shrink wrap off, right? And so I don't want my students to be 35 going, oh, I don't know how to do this, and this is important, I didn't learn it. So we try to think about all the things that would make them so successful. And then we integrate it into the curriculum, and we present it to them in a way that's palatable and easy to understand and digest, and more importantly, to absorb and to do. So there's a very long answer. I'm sorry, to a short question.
Well, it's great. And as I was thinking, you're teaching them to self-regulate, have mastery in areas that many adults don't have mastery in ever. And also just to stop themselves. So I do behavioral optometry. So there's this stress point therapy that I do with people where I'll have them looking on a board and they're doing certain things according to a pattern. And they are told to stop themselves when they make a mistake. And they have to go back to the beginning, and they keep going until they make a mistake, and they have to catch themselves. And when they do, they have to go back until they can get through the whole thing without a mistake. But, you know, the first time through, I'm saying, oop, there's the spot, because they're not aware. But you're making them self-aware.
You know, when I did college planning, I noticed, Kimberly, that so I had these juniors and seniors getting ready to go off to college with, you know, $60,000 of their parents' money and zero self-awareness. They couldn't even tell me when was the best time of day for them to study, or should they study in a closed room, or should they be out in the kitchen where they can sort of see what's going on. They had no self-awareness. And I was like, because I had been in a bubble with my own schools, my own students, and I'm a big proponent of self-awareness and reflection and really getting to know who you are, because that's the only person you can change is the one you see in the mirror. Anybody else, you're like, I'm gonna work. And I just was like so determined after that experience to ensure that my students and my clients really start to develop a sense of self-awareness. I had a client meeting today with a 16-year-old girl who is homeschooled and who hates the classes she's in. And I'm like, well, then why don't you just go to college? She's like, really? I can go to college? I went, yeah, pass the TSI and go take college courses. You can dual credit and off you go. I said, but it's not for the meek and the mild. The minute you step into the college track, there is no redos, there's no undos. You've got to be mature enough. So I'm going to need you between now and January to show me you have the resilience, the maturity, the self-confidence, the self-discipline, the self-regulation to do this, so you don't shoot yourself in the foot trying to do something better. So yeah, it is, I think self-awareness and clarity is the key to everything. I think you can have anything you want. Unfortunately, most people only know what they don't want. So we do an exercise with our students called 101 Wishes. And so if you imagine that the genie has walked in and he puts down Aladdin's lamp the genie doesn't walk in. Aladdin walks in, puts down the lamp, rubs it, and out comes the genie. And the genie says to you, Kimberly, you don't get 3 wishes. You get 101. But the caveat is you have to write them down. And most people can go through about 1 to 35, unless it's right after Christmas, fairly easily, right? It's all material things. And then it gets to, what do you really want? What kind of relationships do you want? Where do you want to travel to? How do you want to show up every day in the world? You know, and you really have to dig deep to get to 101 things you want. And then the magic comes, because once you've written your list, within 2 weeks, 10 of them will show up. It's just the law of attraction. You can't help it. And as you know, I've kept many wish lists for many years because it works. And you'll go back and you're like, wow, didn't come in the first 2 weeks, but it came unmistakably in a place where I never thought it would. I just had to ask for it. And again, being very clear on what you want allows you to go after what you need. And I think that's really important for my students to learn. It was for my daughters. So also being grateful and having appreciation and not sort of slipping into that entitlementitis. I breathe, therefore I deserve. That mentality serves no one, and has disrupted a lot of families. And I think we try to really instill in our students a sense of gratitude and appreciation, and it makes a big difference. They're happy, and I just say to them, I don't want to be with a bunch of kids who aren't happy, so we have to have gratitude. Life's too short.
Yeah, that is beautiful. So right now, education is kind of in turmoil, especially the public schools. Are we going in? Are we doing it virtual? Are we doing it half and half? I know the end of the last year that we had, when I'm talking to teachers as they're coming in, I'm seeing them as patients and I'm talking to them, they're like, the kids aren't logging on, the kids aren't doing their work, they're just taking a vacation. And I'm thinking, all this lost time and knowledge that they're going to need those building blocks. So do you have an answer? There's a lot. That's a big question.
I do. So because we're a small school, we were able to pivot very quickly in March. We went right to Zoom, and I ran online schools before online schools were a thing. So that was easy for us. But what I heard from my parents is the students were very miserable and unhappy. And so we had several sort of town meetings, if you will, with our parents over the summer. And I said to them, I will not be opening virtually. We will only open face to face. And I also assured them that your children are young. Playing in the dirt and being is fine. I will catch them up. We got lots of time. What parents don't realize, and they're trying to do their best, and this is not a criticism, and I'm sure I was the same way when I was that age. Now that I'm old and much wiser, I know different. But back then, we don't want to waste any time. We want to make sure that we give our children every opportunity, and sometimes the opportunity is to just play and learn those self-regulation and executive function. But I also explained to them that, when you look at a Chinese bamboo tree, I don't know if you're familiar with those or not, you have to water and fertilize them for 5 years before you see anything above the surface. And then it shoots up like crazy within a few weeks. Mm-hmm. Children are kind of the same way. So when they're growing physically, they can lose things. They can miss some of those foundational learning blocks you were talking about. Mm-hmm. So we tried our school to be very cognizant of that and to ensure that we're moving at a pace that meets them. Learning is a fine line between frustration and it's too easy and getting bored. And that line moves. It's a moving target. And so we've learned how to straddle that line. And if there's something going on, maybe there's one of our families this year had a divorce, that affects the kids, right? Moving affects the kids, all of these things. And so being aware of that really allows them to step into their own. You can't do that over Zoom. So, and I also believe that I was out of educational integrity if I was to continue with virtual classes for my elementary school students. Middle and high school students, a whole different story. If that's your choice, I don't have a problem with that, but I do for elementary. Elementary, they need to learn that social, emotional interactions and communication and all of that. And so we've been on campus since the 8th of September, which was our original start date. We didn't change it. We've been careful. We put our kids in pods, but I think that COVID has done a couple of things. I think for a lot of parents, it's like the curtain of public school has been pulled back and they're like, that's all they're doing? What I figured out before I homeschooled is now being very much exposed. And I think that for people like myself who are entrepreneurial educators, it's been great because people are realizing that there is different ways, there is better ways, and maybe that crazy things that she does actually has an impact. Back in the way that education was started in this country is kind of an interesting story. So Horace Mann was the first head of the Board of Education for Massachusetts. And he and his wife, his brand new bride, went over to Prussia for their honeymoon. And while he was there, he got to see their educational system, which was designed to ensure that their army, who had been just obliterated in the Napoleonic Wars, that didn't happen to again. So they developed their educational system to produce army people, men, who were fit, obedient, and organized. And so Mann saw this and he's like, this is cool. So he comes back after his honeymoon and he goes to Ford, Vanderbilt, Morgan, and Carnegie, the founding fathers of the Industrial Revolution, and he shares what he's learned. And they're like, oh, we need this because we need standardization across the country that was developed at that time to work our factories and to be our assembly line workers. Then we had the founding 10 fathers of education who were professors who got together and they decided back then that chemistry should be taught in the 10th grade and physics in the 11th grade. They figured all that out. Okay, when they did that, that was 128 years ago. You know what's changed in our classrooms right now? Smart boards, maybe. Like such little change.
Not much at all.
Yet we're stepping into a world where augmented reality and artificial intelligence are keen and needed. And I want my students to be ready for those things. So I have sort of teamed up with quite an interesting group of people, a woman from England, a gentleman from Canada, another gentleman from California, and one who was living in Dallas is now in the Houston area with myself. And we have put together RCI Prep Academy, which will be launching in January. And it's based on what students are going to need to step out into the real world. Recently, President Trump signed an executive order to allow people who don't have degrees to be hired by the government if they have skills. We have now stepped into a very skills-driven world where, you know, when I went to school, and I've said this for years, yes, I have a degree. Yes, it got me my first job. However, there's nothing I learned in college that I've ever been able to apply to my job. I got really good at drinking draft. I was pretty fast. But that didn't really help me to get a job. There were some skills I learned in college that really aren't necessary for my job. But I've been looking for the last several months at high school curriculums and, why are we learning for Shakespearean stories and novels and getting into, I have never in my whole entire life been able to use that knowledge. I'm not saying, and I don't want all your literary people to hate me for this, but I really do want us to look at what we're teaching our children with eyes based on the future, not on the past. And I think that the way we teach, when we look at, this whole teaching from like a sage on the stage at the front of the room instructing doesn't work. My teachers are facilitators. They share in the learning, and that's where the project-based learning comes in, where students really learn about their self, going back to their self-awareness, and then they show up in their collaborative groups and say, you know what, I'm a pretty good artist. I draw really well, so I should probably do the poster. And you know what, Kimberly, you're a really good writer, so could you write up the report for us? And that's true collaboration. That's not just compromising or working together with someone else. Is you have to show up with your skills. And so RCI Prep Academy brings students in and allows them to step into their skill sets. So for example, let's say you want to be a creative designer. We're like, oh, fantastic. You can work on the avatars for our platform that we're developing, that we're going to build together. And then you hand me your first plan of work, and I read through it, and I'm realizing that you have no sentence structure. You have no punctuation or capitalization. And so I go to you and I say, Kimberly, you know what? Your plan of work, I get your concepts. This is awesome. But I've noticed that you're missing some skills in this area. And so I pull you off the project and I put you into an ELA course that allows you to learn those skills. Now, you're probably not going to like it any more than you would have liked it in a regular high school, but you're like, okay, well, now it has meaning and purpose. Now I get it. So it's allowing students to step into their gifts, truly exploring them, and then connecting them with industries that will use those gifts. And what we're seeing with big firms like Apple and Google, they can't find what they want in the workforce. They're coming out of college and they can't think. So they want to, and we've talked to them, take our students and bring them in a more of a sort of apprenticeship, if you go back to those, where they can kind of groom them the way they need them to be. And it's a fascinating new way to educate. And we are super, super excited about what we're going to be able to bring. So yeah, it's going to be really fun.
And how do you take what a student's dream is and encourage it and nurture it and get them going in the right direction?
That's a great question. So every year at my school, and we serve, as I mentioned, first through fifth graders, we have a theme, and this year's theme is celebrating your dreams. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, another friend from California, and we were talking, and he's like, Deb, it's so interesting. Parents put kids into, soccer, and they put them in piano, and they get them in swimming lessons. But when their child says, when I grow up, I want to be X, the parent's like, oh, that's nice. And there's no more discussion about it. Mm-hmm. All the sports that I played as a child growing up were fun. They were great. I don't do any of them now. I was Canadian. I played hockey and I played baseball. I'm not playing hockey anymore. So what if we put as much energy, effort, and financial resources into allowing a child as young as first grade to follow their dreams? So that's what we've tasked our children with right now. And they're thinking, I want to be a veterinarian. And then they go and do some research, or we bring them someone to speak to. And I had one little girl, this happened yesterday, say to me, Mrs. Elder, I wanted to be a veterinarian, but do you know they give needles to animals? I don't think I can do that, right? And I'm like, well, why did you want to be a veterinarian? I love animals. Well, what else could you do? Or maybe that's a hobby. And maybe there's, it's those kinds of discussions that give the same amount of weight. Another child, he's in 5th grade. He wanted to be a lawyer until he realized that he didn't really want to go to court every day. So he's now going to be a contract lawyer because he likes to read. It's opening up. Do I expect what they declare they're going to be in the 2nd grade to be what they, no, contrast is really important. It's just as important to me that they determine what they don't want to do as it is when they determine what they do want to do. But if we were to poll all of the people, all the adults in the States and say, when you were a little girl, Kimberly, what did you want to be when you grow up? How many of us did this kind of crazy all over the place only to land exactly where we knew we wanted to be when we were 5? So I'm just trying to shortcut that for them if possible. And it's a really fun project. They're working on dream boards right now, which are very similar to a vision board. And they've painted their canvases in art because it's a very collaborative process, very project-based learning. Mm-hmm. And they're working in social studies coming up and doing the research. So what does a lawyer, a veterinarian, a school teacher, what do they make? What does their lifestyle look like? So if I make this much, what house could I live in? Is that what I want? Could I live in this area? Are there good? It's all of that, and they can go as deep into this project as they choose. It's not like they're being graded on it. It's one of the themes for the year. So it just is. It's just remarkable to listen to the aha moments as they realize that what they thought they wanted to do, they've already gone, maybe not, or they're super excited and motivated and are not changing their minds and and I said to them, whatever you decide you want to do, my commitment to each of you is that I will find you someone who is currently doing that role, and I will put you in touch with them and you can talk to them. Because that's, this idea about, like, when I wanted to be a police officer, I had a vision in my head of what that was going to look like, and it was very different than what the actual role was. And I think that I don't regret anything I've done in my life, and I really enjoyed the journey I've been on, and I think it's made me who I am today. But it would have been nice if I had a clear understanding of what that role entailed. Part of the problem was when I was hired, I was 23 years old, and had long blonde hair, and probably 116 pounds soaking wet. And I was the first female they had hired in 8 years.
Oh, wow.
And so Vice spoke to me my 2nd day on the job. And my father was like, oh, heck no. It was like, I don't think we're doing that. But so I really want to give them the opportunity to really explore and to support their dreams. And I think that's important for kids.
Yeah, it really is. And I resonate with what you said about the veterinarian. So I wanted to be a veterinarian. And then I got into 9th grade into biology. And we were cutting things open. And I'm like, oh, no. I'll just continue petting the animals. Forget about cutting on them or giving them shots or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the reality really helps that they can see the reality early on and make that decision, because so many jobs look glorious from the outside, but when you're inside, it's really different. Really,
like
different.
Sitting in a stakeout for 6 hours with someone you don't really want to be together. There's so many pieces of it. And I think that who gives kids an opportunity to explore and then support? It's about the support area of it, about really saying, I believe in you.
Mhm.
But, I know you want to be an engineer, but do you like math? No, I hate math. There's a lot of math in engineering. And the other thing I've noticed too is we tend to, as children, we idolize, or all we know is what our parents do and what their friends do. So if you're a doctor, I'm sure many of your friends are doctors. So if you have children, they're like, well, I could be a doctor. But there's so many other things. Maybe that's not the best fit for you, or maybe that's not what your gifts are and your talents that you should be, really building on and exploring. And so trying to get them to even think down that path has been awesome, and they really enjoy it.
Mhm.
They really enjoy it.
So we've been talking a lot about thinking. How do you help children to actually be thinkers and problem solvers as opposed to regurgitating whatever the test requires?
That's a really good question. And there's 7 levels of knowledge, and the lowest level is regurgitation. It's simply giving back, right, what you've been told. So I ran an after school program, which I forgot to mention, for several years. And what I learned doing that, because I was very connected with the public school students at that time, they would finish school and they would come over to me. And it wasn't a tutoring program, it was truly an after school learning program. And I wasn't babysitting, because the minute your work was done, you left. So the kids would come in and we would go over what their work was for the week. We would talk about it on a Monday. They would tell me what they believed their assignments were for the week. I would then verify with their teacher, and then we would set them straight if needed. And then we would plan out. And they also knew that if something was taught that day that they didn't quite understand, we would go over it together, because I wanted them to learn in real time. I said, whatever you were taught today, you need to own before you go to sleep tonight. And then tomorrow you're going to get the next piece. So you can't like put it off for the test, which is what they often did. So they would I would say to these students, we should start practicing and studying and getting really clear on the concepts for your science test next week. They're like, oh, yeah, well, Mrs. Elder, we haven't got the review sheet yet. I'm like, what? But they were so trained to cram, because they would get the review sheet, and until they had that, they wouldn't study. I'm like, and so I would teach them a different way to prepare.
Mhm.
And then they had understanding. And so I haven't had my after school program since 2017, but that's when the voice was very popular.
Mhm.
So just to give you an insight into some of the things that we did to make it fun. So I had swirling chairs like mine, a little bit
Uh-huh.
smaller, that rolled. And so we would be studying, and oftentimes there were students in the same grade level, and so they would have the same material to study. And so I remember distinctly, I had 3 students, we were preparing for a biology test. And I said, okay, face the wall. I'm going to read the question. When you think you know it, turn your chair around like Blake Shelton. Give me your answer. Because when you make the learning emotional, and you make it really, like, I don't know, engaging and fun, and that's what they remember. Because what was happening is we would study, we would learn the material, they would go take the test. I'd be so excited, they'd come back after school and be like, so what was on the test? I'm like, oh, I don't remember.
Mhm.
What? It was 2 hours ago. How do you not remember? And so making it really fun, and doing, I let the kids write on the whiteboard. They love that. Well, the
Mhm.
teachers don't let them at school. And so they would write out, because I said, you can't just read your notes. That's not studying, that's reading.
Mhm.
Studying has to take action. It has to go like from your head out the tip of your finger, and then it has to go back in so it's sticky. Otherwise, it just kind of floats around and then it leaves out your left ear, and you wonder why you studied for 6 hours and you got to the test and you couldn't find anything. Or maybe you didn't file it in the right spots. So I used to tell my daughters when they were little, it's like you have a secretary up there. She's not very good. So we need to help her by giving her information on where to put the information so you can retrieve it. That's what knowledge is. You can put it all up there, but if you can't get it, like if you think about the last time you went to the grocery store and you ran into a friend, but you couldn't remember her name, like an acquaintance, and then you get home and 3 days later you're in the shower and you're like, oh, it was Susan.
Uh-huh.
It's there, it just was filed incorrectly. So becoming efficient with how you put information in allows you to retrieve it in a way that gives you success. And so there's certain ways to put information in that allow that to happen. And so that's what I teach my students. And that gives them an edge. So it makes learning fun, and they like it. And when you have understanding, it's not hard, right? You don't have to. We used to do this thing where I used to teach 10 things that went with the 10 numbers. So like pole, shoe, tricycle, I'm sure you know all these tricks, right? Why pole? Well, pole is 1 because it looks like a 1. 2 is shoe because you wear 2 shoes.
Mm-hmm.
3 is triangle because there's 3 sides to a triangle.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was teaching that, I was also traveling a lot when I was training teachers. So I would get to a new hotel room every week. Well, they don't give you keys anymore with the number on it. You had to remember what your room number was.
Yes.
And so I would use this system to help me remember. And so when I would teach it to the students, I said, this is how you can remember all your dates and history. And it was a game, but it was fun. And you just chunk. What do you already know to new information? And you connect it and you accelerate the learning. So that allows it to have meaning and have purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Well, thank you for all this information. It is great having you on because I know a lot of people want the answers to these educational questions. So, what things are you working on now? You have the school for the younger kids, and then you have the prep school for the older kids. So, why don't you just kind of summarize that? And I bet you there's some people that would like to get involved in those schools, at least if it's local to them. Or why don't you explain what's available?
Sure. So Shady Oak Primary School is my elementary school, and it's also ready to be licensed. So if somebody's listening to this and are like, I'd really like to have my child go there, or I would like as a teacher to step into entrepreneurial education and start my own school, I can help you with that. I have a packet ready to go. So there's that. And then RCI Prep Academy is something that can be done virtually, so you don't have to be in the Houston area. Our first hub will be here. So think of it like an adult who can choose if they want to go into class or they want to do it online. Some of the students that I'm talking to absolutely love the online learning, the older ones, especially the GT kids, the super smart kids who are already motivated because they can work at their own pace, they can get it done and move on, right? They don't have to wait for the kid in the back who's not paying attention, who's making them so angry because they never pay attention. It's very efficient learning if you're dialed in and tuned in, right? So those are the kids we're looking for. We're looking for kids who have some really strong passions. Maybe they want to code, or maybe they have a gift they want to learn about cyber security and all of those sort of new cutting edge jobs. We want to get those kids in and give them exposure to those alongside with getting the reading, writing, and arithmetic they're going to need, right? So it's making time in their school schedule to get rid of things that aren't going to serve them in the real world. And without jeopardizing their abilities, because I understand at 15, you might think you want to do this and then go over here. We're not going to ever rob them of opportunities, but we are going to be very mindful and ensure that their learning and their education is efficient and relevant. And so those are 2 big projects. I do a lot of speaking. I love to speak. If I could just be on the stage, that's all I would do. I love that. But you need to have the stories to tell on the stage, so you have to do something else.
Yeah.
And I also work with clients. So I met today with a 16-year-old who's really struggling being in high school. She's homeschooled. And I said, if you would like, I can teach you how to go to college in January and you can just dual credit. She's like, I can? I went, yeah, if you're willing, I'll show you how to do that. So, and that can be done. And I've done it for years virtually. You don't have to be in Houston for that either. So I can help you with your child's academic success, kindergarten all the way through college, teaching accelerated learning methods and just different things, being an accountability coach, which is something that sometimes they just need. I remember meeting a family and talking to the son, and the dad's watching and I'm saying all these things and he's like, he listened to you. That's the same stuff I've been telling him. I said, oh, I have a different face than you. That's all.
It
So I
can
would
be
love
very
to hear
frustrating as a parent, that's for sure.
Yeah, I would love to hear from any of your listeners if something I said intrigued them, they're welcome to get a hold of me. I've got several ebooks that I'm sending out to people if they would like, anything from parenting, for helping professional teachers. So yeah, I'm so excited to talk and meet with any of your listeners. I'd be honored. Thank you.
So yes, and what is the best way to reach you? Is it on social media? Is it through a website?
So all of those, I have a couple of YouTube channels, so they're welcome to join and subscribe there, and I would love that. And one of them is just Debbie Elder LLC or Shady Oak Primary and RCI Academy. So all of those are on YouTube. I'm all over social media with Debbie Elder LLC, Shady Oak, or RCI Prep. So I'm very easy to find. Or you can just email me at delder@shadyoakprimary.com. So super easy to find.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and sharing all this
me.
knowledge. I know people are just going to be eating it up. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I do have one
fun.
more question. Yeah, before we get off. What is your best advice on living an incredible, amazing life?
Self-awareness. The more you know about what you want, the better chance you have to reach it and get it off the shelf, because anything you want is there for you. If you can think it, you can have it. And it's the minute you decide what you want, your reticular activated system, your RAS, which is part of your brain that focuses. So I bought a car a couple of years ago, and I'm not really a vehicle person. And I never even knew this car existed. I just found it with my husband and we bought it. And then I'm driving and I'm like, oh my gosh, that car is everywhere. How did I not see it before? Well, I wasn't dialed into it. And so if you have clarity about what you want and are willing to go after it, you can have anything you need. And I think that's how you have a happy, long, lovely life. So get clear, spend some time getting to know you.
Thank you so much. And we'll talk to you again soon.
I would love that. Thank you.